Hey, this is Dr. Johnson, and in this video we want to talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of primary sources. Like, what if you wanted to study about the Statue of Liberty? Well, you could always go to the Statue of Liberty, but that's going to be a little bit hard to do with your entire class. I mean, you could take them inside, and it's really cool, but you don't have that. So you use primary sources with the students, like this photograph. What a great way to personalize history with the students. You could talk about things that are happening in this photograph. All sorts of things could be discussed. Or you could look at even older photographs, because primary source photographs like this, they really capture a moment in time, something that we just don't understand because it's a different time and a different place. Other things that are great are like this brochure. They make connections, because you can talk about how the brochure and the Statue of Liberty were used to advertise government bonds. And you could talk about how this poem right here, The New Colossus, was sold in books like this so that they could raise money to build the podium that the Statue of Liberty sits upon. They would sell this at 2 cents a time, and they would get enough money to actually build that pedestal that it sits on. They could also give you a really unique perspective, like this political cartoon. If you look really closely at this, it has a really unique perspective of what the attitudes towards immigration in the United States were at the time the Statue of Liberty was being built. Some other things that you might want to think about when using primary sources, they're not all fabulous. Like, remember that New Colossus poem? Here it is, in her original handwriting, except it's really hard to read. So primary sources can get a little messy. And even if you can get them up close like this, it's still really hard to read. Like, can you tell what her first and last name are? Kind of difficult. You know, you could translate them, but that's going to take you time, and as a teacher you may not have some time. So some problems with primary source documents. And you know what? Even if you translate them, look at the language on this. This is an argument for educating women in 1735. And look at the language in 1735 and tell me if you think that any 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade student is going to understand that. It's going to be really hard. So think about those things. Now, another thing that primary sources do is they can often only give you one perspective. They give you a little bit of bias. Like, here's the Boston Massacre, and this particular advertisement was done 3 weeks after the Boston Massacre by a very famous silversmith, Paul Revere. But speaking of bias, you know, here's one account, 2 accounts, and 3 accounts, and they're all different. The first account, a snowball struck a grenadier who immediately fired. The second account, the snowballs now and then coming towards the soldiers, the captain commanded them to fire. Upon this, one gun quickly went off. And then the third one is from the captain of the soldiers. Upon asking my soldiers why they fired without orders, they said they heard the word fire and supposed it came from me. This might be the cause, as many of the mob called fire, fire, but I assured the men that I gave no such order, that my words were, don't fire, stop your firing. So we have 3 different perspectives here, and they're all a little bit different. So that can be a little bit different, a little bit hard to deal with. Not only that, but look at Paul Revere's. It lacks what we call critical distance. This is an advertisement to push the revolutionary point of view. It certainly makes the British look like meanies. They're just shooting. It's all the British's fault. It's all the British doing the massacre. I suspect that if we had a political cartoon from the British side, we would get their perspective, but theirs would also lack critical distance. So primary sources really focus you in on that really specific moment. But remember, different perspectives can even happen with one person experiencing an event. I mean, do you know that the first vision, the Joseph Smith, has 4 different accounts of it, and they're all a little bit different? That doesn't mean that any of the accounts are wrong, but at different times in Joseph Smith's life, he remembered different things or wanted to emphasize different parts of that story. So having different perspectives can be really good, but can also be a little bit dangerous. Now, here's another problem with primary sources. Can you spot the problem? This is from the BYUH groundbreaking. Have you noticed there in the background that primary sources can be manipulated? Did you know the temple sat on top of the mountains in the background? You know, here's the original photograph. No temple. temple, no temple, temple. In fact, the temple from where President McKay is standing is actually to his left, off to the screen that way. So things can be manipulated really easy, and this has been happening with primary sources for a long time. Postcards when I was a kid were big. They do not have trout that large in Wyoming. They do not have jackrabbits that you can ride. Manipulation happens all the time, and in fact, they can manipulate anything. Here's some great videos. Listen to this manipulation.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
These are all famous movies. And you might go back and watch these movies, and you're going to wonder, did they actually sing that song in those movies? Yeah, that's called deep faking, and that shows that things can be manipulated. So all in all, remember that primary sources have a lot of great advantages, but there's also some disadvantages in using them that you need to be aware of. And with that, have a great day.